Elena Rossi's hand went to her belly before it went to her face. That instinct, protect the baby first, yourself second, should have been her first warning that tonight would end in blood. Normal people avoided Bianca Valli's table. Experienced servers called in sick when they saw her name on the reservation list. The last waitress who had served her had quit the industry entirely, moving to another state to escape the whispers. But Elena couldn't afford to be afraid. She was 7 months pregnant, 3 weeks behind on rent, and desperately saving for a crib from the secondhand store on Malcolm Street. So she stood there, order pad trembling slightly in her hand, watching this beautiful, terrifying woman in the crimson dress decide exactly how to humiliate her. Before the story continues, please kindly hit the subscribe button to subscribe, because your support helps us create the sweetest stories just for you. You are staring, Bianca said, her voice cutting through the crystalline silence of Blackwood Manor's dining room. At my fiancé, with those pathetic eyes. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Around them, the restaurant had gone completely still. The other servers had disappeared into the kitchen. The wealthy patrons sat frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, because everyone who dined at Blackwood Manor knew what came next. They had all witnessed it before. Bianca Valli would make her accusation, false or true, it never mattered, and then she would destroy her target slowly, methodically, until they were nothing but a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and employee bathrooms. She would smile while she did it, her perfect red lips curved in pleasure, because Bianca didn't just want to win. She wanted her victims to know they never stood a chance. Elena had only been working here for 3 weeks, but she had heard the stories about the hostess who had smiled too warmly at a male guest and ended up with her car destroyed and her apartment lease mysteriously terminated. About the sommelier who had corrected Bianca's pronunciation of a French wine and lost his work visa within days. About the chef who had refused to remake a perfectly cooked steak and found his entire family's restaurant chain suddenly failing health inspections across the city. Bianca Valli was engaged to Killian Blackwood, the man who owned half of New York's legitimate businesses and all of its illegitimate ones. His name appeared in police reports that disappeared before morning. His influence reached into courtrooms, construction sites, and city council meetings. His tattooed hands had built an empire from blood and concrete. But Killian ruled from the shadows, a ghost in expensive suits who rarely spoke above a whisper. Bianca ruled in the spotlight. She was his crown, his declaration of dominance, his living warning to anyone who thought about defying him. And she loved every moment of the fear she inspired. I asked you a question, Bianca continued, rising from her chair with liquid grace. Were you staring at Killian? Imagining what it would be like to touch a man who actually matters? To be something other than a knocked-up nobody serving pasta? Elena's hand tightened protectively over her swollen belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her mother's rising panic. I wasn't staring, ma'am. I was waiting to see if you needed anything else. Don't lie to me. Bianca's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. She stepped closer, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. I saw you. Everyone saw you. You think because you're pregnant you get special treatment? You think that belly makes you untouchable? The other diners looked away, suddenly fascinated by their plates. No one would help. No one ever helped. Elena had learned that lesson long before tonight, when her boyfriend had left her with nothing but a positive pregnancy test and empty promises, when her landlord had raised her rent knowing she couldn't fight back, when the world had made it clear that women like her were disposable. But she needed this job. Needed the tips that would buy diapers and formula. Needed the health insurance that would cover her delivery. Needed to survive just a few more weeks until she could take maternity leave and figure out what came next. I apologize if I made you uncomfortable, Elena said softly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. It wasn't my intention. The slap came so fast Elena didn't see it coming. Bianca's hand connected with her face, with a crack that echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. The force of it sent Elena stumbling backward, her hip colliding with the edge of the table. Wine glasses toppled, red liquid spreading across white linen like blood at a crime scene. Elena's hand flew to her cheek, tears springing to her eyes, not from pain, but from the shock and humiliation of being struck in front of 50 witnesses who would do nothing. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. But no one moved to help. No one challenged Bianca Valli. No one except the man who had been sitting in the shadows at the corner table, watching everything unfold with eyes the color of winter storms. Killian Blackwood stood up so slowly that time itself seemed to stop. He was taller than Elena remembered from glimpses across the dining room, 6'3" of controlled violence in a perfectly tailored black suit. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked carved from granite. But it was his hands that drew Elena's eye, tattooed knuckles, scarred fingers, hands that had clearly done terrible things. Those hands were clenched into fists. And his face had gone absolutely white. "Killian, darling," Bianca purred, turning toward her fiancé with a triumphant smile. "I'm sorry you had to see that." But she needed to learn respect. "Don't move." The command was so quiet that Elena almost missed it. But the effect was instantaneous. Bianca froze mid-step, her smile faltering. Because that voice, cold and empty and absolutely lethal, wasn't the voice of the man who indulged her whims and let her rule his public world. That was the voice of the monster who built empires on broken bones. Killian Blackwood walked toward them with the measured pace of a predator. His eyes never left Elena's face, specifically the red handprint blooming across her cheek and the way she was doubled over slightly, one arm wrapped protectively around her pregnant belly, the other braced against the table to keep from falling. He stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that Elena could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Close enough that when he lifted one tattooed hand, she flinched instinctively. But he didn't strike her. He didn't even touch her. Instead, his fingers moved to her hair with impossible gentleness, brushing aside the dark strands that had fallen across her neck during the assault. Elena started to pull away, confused and terrified, but then she felt it, the feather-light touch of his fingertips against a small, star-shaped birthmark just behind her left ear. The birthmark she'd had since birth. The one that had always looked like someone had pressed their thumb into wet clay and left behind a constellation. Killian's hand began to shake. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. "No, it can't be." And then, in front of 50 witnesses, in front of his fiancée, in front of the entire world that feared and obeyed him, Killian Blackwood reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy gold signet ring, the Blackwood family crest, the symbol of his absolute authority, the key to an empire worth billions. He placed it carefully, almost reverently, in Elena's blood-stained, trembling palm. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking on the words. "I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner." Elena stared at the ring, then at the man, then at Bianca's face, which had transformed from triumphant to horrified in the span of seconds. "What are you doing?" Bianca demanded, her voice rising to a shriek. "Killian, what are you doing?" But Killian wasn't looking at his fiancée anymore. He was looking at Elena with an expression she couldn't interpret, something between grief and rage and a desperate, aching hope. "You have my mother's eyes," he said quietly. "And her birthmark. The same constellation. The same exact placement." He turned then, finally, to face Bianca. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire dining room with the finality of a closing coffin. "The engagement is over. Get out." The words landed like bombs. Someone gasped. Someone else started crying. But Elena couldn't focus on any of it because she was too busy staring at the ring in her hand and the man who had just given her, impossibly, inexplicably, the keys to his entire kingdom. "You don't mean that," Bianca said, her voice shaking now, all her composure crumbling. "Killian, you're upset. She's manipulating you somehow." I said get out. Killian's voice dropped to something sub-zero. "And if you ever, touch my sister again, I will forget that I once cared about you. Do you understand me, Bianca?" The word hung in the air like a detonation.
Sister.
Elena's knees buckled. The ring slipped from her grasp, clattering against the marble floor with a sound like church bells. Because it wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. She was Elena Rossi, daughter of no one, abandoned at St. Catherine's Orphanage 23 years ago with nothing but a blood-stained blanket and a star-shaped birthmark. She wasn't anyone's sister, especially not the sister of New York's most dangerous man. But Killian was already moving, catching her before she hit the ground, his tattooed hands impossibly gentle as they supported her weight. "I've got you," he murmured, and there were tears in his eyes, actual tears, which seemed more impossible than anything else that had happened tonight. "I've got you, Elena. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." Behind them, Bianca Valley screamed, a sound of pure rage and humiliation that would echo through New York's elite circles for months to come. But Elena couldn't focus on that either, because she was too busy trying to understand how her life had just shattered and rebuilt itself in the span of 5 minutes. The pregnant waitress who'd been slapped and humiliated was gone. In her place stood the sister of a monster. And the gold ring on the floor between them was the only proof that any of this was real. The evening had started like any other shift at Blackwood Manor, soft piano music drifting through the dining room, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables draped in cream linen, the wealthy elite of Manhattan murmuring over $20 oysters and $100 bottles of wine. Elena had been grateful for the steady rhythm of it, the way she could disappear into the role of invisible servant, collecting generous tips that would inch her closer to affording that second-hand crib. Then Bianca Valley arrived in a dress the color of fresh blood, and everything changed. Elena had served their table twice already without incident, bringing champagne, taking their dinner order, refilling water glasses with practiced efficiency. But on her third approach, she caught Killian Blackwood staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Not the predatory gaze she'd grown accustomed to from men who saw her pregnancy as a moral failing, but something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. She'd looked away quickly, heat rising to her cheeks, and that single moment of eye contact had been enough. Bianca's perfectly manicured hand shot out, gripping Elena's wrist hard enough to bruise. "You were staring at my fiancé." The words dripped with venom. "Do you think because you spread your legs for some loser who abandoned you, that makes you worthy of looking at a man like Killian?" The other diners stopped mid-conversation. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the piano player's fingers stumbled over the keys before falling silent. Elena tried to pull away, her free hand instinctively covering her belly, but Bianca's grip tightened. I was just," Elena stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "You weren't what? You weren't imagining what it would be like to trap a real man? To use that bastard in your belly to get what you don't deserve?" Bianca rose from her chair, towering over Elena in 6-inch heels. "Let me teach you something about knowing your place." The slap came without warning, a vicious backhand that snapped Elena's head to the side and sent her stumbling into the neighboring table. Wine glasses shattered against marble. Elena's vision blurred with tears, her cheek exploding in white-hot pain. She caught herself against a chair, gasping. One hand pressed to her face while the other cradled her stomach protectively. The room erupted in scandalized whispers, but no one moved. No one helped. They never did. Then Killian stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and somehow more terrifying than if he'd lunged across the room. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a death knell. The temperature in the dining room seemed to drop 10 degrees as he walked toward them, his tattooed hands hanging loose at his sides, his expression carved from mice. He stopped in front of Elena, his eyes locked on something behind her ear, the birthmark that had always been there, hidden beneath her hair. His face went white. His hands began to shake. "Killian, darling, I'm sorry you had to witness that," Bianca started, her voice syrupy with false concern. But she needed to learn. "Be quiet." The command was so soft it barely registered, but Bianca's mouth snapped shut like she'd been struck. Killian reached out with trembling fingers, gently brushing Elena's hair aside to fully reveal the star-shaped mark. He stared at it for what felt like an eternity, his jaw working silently, before his gaze dropped to her terrified face. "Show me your left hand," he said hoarsely. Elena, too shocked to disobey, extended her hand. Killian turned it over, examining her palm, then pushed up her sleeve to reveal her inner wrist. There, faint but unmistakable, was a small circular scar, barely visible after 23 years. "The orphanage fire," he whispered. "You grabbed the metal bed frame trying to get out. I remember. You were 3 years old." He pulled his own sleeve back, revealing an identical scar in the same location. The dining room had gone beyond silent. It had achieved a vacuum of sound where even breathing seemed forbidden. Killian reached into his jacket with a hand that couldn't stop shaking and withdrew the signet ring, heavy gold stamped with the Blackwood crest, the symbol that opened every door and commanded absolute obedience in 6 states. He placed it in Elena's palm, closing her fingers around it with both of his hands. "I thought you died in that fire," he said, his voice breaking. "They told me everyone in the East Wing died. I've spent 20 years thinking I was alone." Then he turned to Bianca, and his expression transformed into something ancient and merciless. "The engagement is over. If you ever touch her again, I'll forget we were ever friends." Killian's private office was on the 3rd floor of Blackwood Manor, accessible only by a key-locked elevator that required both a code and a fingerprint scan. Elena stood in the corner of the mirrored compartment, her reflection showing a woman she barely recognized, cheeks swollen and bruised, mascara streaked down her face, one hand still clutching her pregnant belly, like it was the only real thing in a world that had suddenly stopped making sense. Killian stood on the opposite side, giving her space, his eyes never leaving her face. When the doors opened, he gestured for her to exit first, then led her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. He unlocked a heavy oak door and stepped aside, waiting until she entered before following. The office was all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Killian moved to a bar cart and poured 2 glasses of water. Not scotch or wine, just water, and brought one to Elena. She took it with shaking hands, her mind still trying to process the word he'd said in front of 50 witnesses.
"Sister."
"Sit, please," Killian said, gesturing to a leather sofa. "You shouldn't be standing after." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "After what she did." Elena lowered herself carefully onto the sofa, every movement cautious. The baby kicked, a flutter of protest against all the stress hormones flooding her system. Killian sat across from her in a wingback chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together like he was praying or trying to stop them from shaking. "Our parents were Marcus and Isabel Blackwood," he began, his voice rough. "Old money, legitimate businesses, everything respectable. Until they weren't. My father made enemies, the kind that don't go away when you apologize or pay them off. When I was 8 and you were 3, someone set fire to the east wing of St. Catherine's where we'd been placed for protection. The fire spread fast. Too fast." Elena's water glass trembled in her hands. "I don't remember any of this." "You wouldn't. You were so small." Killian's eyes were distant, seeing ghosts. "As I was in the West Wing that night, they told me everyone in the East Wing died, 16 children for staff members. They showed me the casualty list. Your name was on it.
Elena Marie Blackwood.
Dead at 3 years old." "But I'm not dead," Elena whispered.
"Im Elena Marie Rossi."
"They told me I was abandoned, that my parents didn't want me. They lied." Killian's voice turned sharp. "Someone pulled you out and erased your identity. Changed your name, your records, everything. Made you disappear." Elena shook her head, the movement making her vision swim. "This is insane. You're telling me I'm some kind of what? Lost heiress? That I've been scrubbing floors and serving pasta when I should have been." She gestured at the opulent office. "Living like this?" "Yes." The single word carried the weight of 20 years of grief. "I don't believe you." But even as she said it, Elena's hand went to the birthmark behind her ear. The same constellation. The same placement. The scar on her wrist that she'd always assumed came from some forgotten childhood accident. Coincidences, surely. They had to be. Killian stood and moved to his desk, retrieving a leather portfolio. He returned and opened it, revealing photographs yellow with age. A young couple holding 2 children, a dark-haired boy with serious eyes and a toddler girl with curls and a gap-toothed smile. In the second photo, the little girl's head was turned, and there, clear as day behind her ear, was the star-shaped birthmark. Elena's breath caught. The girl's eyes were her eyes. The shape of her face, even at 3 years old, was unmistakable. "I've carried these for 20 years," Killian said quietly. "I built an empire looking for the people who took you from me. And tonight, you walked into my restaurant carrying a tray of water glasses." Elena pressed her palm against her face, trying to hold herself together. "This doesn't make sense. Why now? Why didn't someone find me sooner?" "Because you were hidden well. Because I was 8 years old and powerless. Because by the time I had the resources to look properly, the trail was 20 years cold." Killian's voice cracked. "But you're here now. You're alive. That's all that matters." He reached into his wallet and pulled out 3 black credit cards, setting them on the coffee table between them. Then he added a set of keys on a platinum keychain. "The cards have no limit. The keys are to the estate in Westchester, 15 bedrooms, full staff, complete security. You're moving in tonight." Elena stared at the pile of wealth like it was a coiled snake. "I can't accept this. I don't even know if I believe you." "Then get a DNA test. I'll arrange it tomorrow." Killian pushed the cards and keys closer. "But tonight, you're not going back to whatever apartment you've been barely affording. You're not working another shift while 7 months pregnant. You're coming home, Elena, where you should have been all along." The words broke something inside her, some dam that had been holding back 23 years of abandonment and struggle and wondering why she'd never been enough. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable, and before she could protest, Killian was kneeling in front of her, his tattooed hands carefully taking hers. "I know you're scared. I know this is overwhelming. But I'm your brother, and I failed you once. I won't fail you again." Bianca's father kept his office in a building that didn't officially exist, a penthouse above a dry cleaning business in Queens, accessible only through a service elevator that required 3 separate keys. Lorenzo Valli sat behind his desk like a king holding court, his silver hair slicked back, his suit impeccable despite the late hour. He didn't look up when Bianca entered, her mascara ruined, her pride shattered, her crimson dress wrinkled from the cab ride across the city. "He ended it," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "In front of everyone. He gave that pregnant whore his ring and threw me out like garbage." Lorenzo finally raised his eyes, and Bianca saw the cold calculation that had built the Valley Empire from neighborhood protection rackets to international money laundering. "Tell me exactly what happened."
She did.
Every humiliating detail. The slap, the birthmark, Killian's inexplicable claim that the waitress was his sister. The ring placed in her palm. The way he'd looked at Bianca like she was nothing, less than nothing, after 2 years of engagement, after she'd stood beside him at every important meeting and social function, after she'd made herself indispensable to his public image. "A sister," Lorenzo repeated slowly, lighting a cigar. "Convenient timing, don't you think? A pregnant nobody shows up, and suddenly Killian discovers long-lost family? It's a con," Bianca hissed. "It has to be. She seduced him somehow, manipulated him." "Or," Lorenzo interrupted, smoke curling from his lips, Killian finally showed his true weakness. He always was sentimental about family, about the past. He leaned back in his chair, considering. "This girl, Elena, she's a liability. To him and to us. If Killian is distracted, if his organization sees him making emotional decisions, that's an opening." Bianca leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that a pregnant waitress suddenly elevated to Blackwood royalty is a story the press will devour. Especially if we help them understand what really happened." Lorenzo pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "I know photographers who specialize in compromising images. Editors who owe me favors. We paint a picture of seduction, of manipulation, of a gold digger using her pregnancy to trap New York's most eligible bachelor. But he claims she's his sister, Bianca protested. Claims. That's the key word. Lorenzo smiled, and it was the expression of a man who destroyed better people for less. Without DNA evidence, which takes weeks to process, it's just his word. And his word suddenly looks very suspicious when photos emerge of them alone together, when sources reveal she'd been working at his restaurant for weeks before the dramatic recognition. When medical experts question whether that birthmark is really so unique. He made a call, speaking in rapid Italian to someone who responded with eager agreement. When he hung up, his smile had widened. By tomorrow morning, every tabloid in the city will have photos of Killian putting his ring on that girl's finger. The headline will write itself. Mafia boss dumps fiancé for pregnant mistress, claims she's his sister. We'll have psychiatrists questioning his mental state, former employees suggesting inappropriate behavior, competitors circling like sharks. Bianca felt her rage crystallizing into something colder, sharper. And then, when Killian is drowning in scandal, when his empire is destabilized, when he's desperate to protect this girl he's so suddenly devoted to, Lorenzo paused, ash from his cigar falling like snow. Accidents happen. Pregnant women are fragile. Stress can cause complications. Tragic, really. You're talking about killing her. Bianca's voice was flat, but her heart raced with dark satisfaction. I'm talking about removing a problem before it becomes a crisis. For all of us. Lorenzo stood, buttoning his jacket. You wanted revenge, daughter. I'm giving you an empire. When the dust settles, Killian will be weakened, vulnerable, possibly destroyed. And the Valley family will be there to pick up the pieces. Bianca smiled for the first time since the slap, and it was the expression of a woman who'd just been handed a knife and told exactly where to cut. When do we start? We already have. Lorenzo showed her his phone, where messages were already being sent to photographers, journalists, and paid informants throughout the city. By sunrise, Elena Rossi will be the most hated woman in New York. And by next week, she'll be gone. The Westchester estate was a fortress disguised as a mansion, 12-foot walls topped with decorative ironwork that concealed security cameras, manicured gardens patrolled by men with earpieces and shoulder holsters, windows made of bulletproof glass that cost more per square foot than Elena's entire yearly salary. She arrived at 3 a.m, driven by one of Killian's men in a black SUV with tinted windows, and was greeted by a housekeeper named Maria, who showed her to a bedroom suite larger than her former apartment. Elena didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of a bed that could fit 4 people and watched the sun rise through windows overlooking grounds that seemed to stretch forever, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake accepting Killian's protection. The credit cards felt like weights in her pocket. The keys burned against her palm. By 7 a.m., she heard voices downstairs, low, urgent, unmistakably angry. Elena called on the robe Maria had left for her and ventured into the hallway, following the sound to a study with double doors left partially ajar. Don't care what excuse he gives you, Killian was saying, his voice ice. Marcus knew the rules. He skimmed from 3 shipments. That's not a mistake. That's theft. He's got a family, boss. 2 kids under 5. The second voice was younger, uncertain. Then he should have thought about them before stealing from me. A pause, then. Tell him he's got 24 hours to return what he took plus 50% interest. After that, we do this the other way. Elena pushed the door open without thinking. The study was all dark wood and leather, walls lined with books that probably had never been read. Killian sat behind a massive desk, and standing before him was a young man, barely 20, who went pale when Elena entered. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to interrupt. Killian's expression transformed the moment he saw her, the cold authority melting into concern.
Anna.
You should be resting, the doctor said. I heard you. She gestured to the young man, who was trying to become invisible. You're going to hurt someone because he stole from you? I'm going to hold someone accountable for breaking our agreement. Killian stood, dismissing the young man with a curt nod. When they were alone, he crossed to a cabinet and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch despite the early hour. This is my world. It's not pleasant, but it's necessary. Elena saw the gun then, a matte black pistol sitting casually on the desk beside a stack of financial reports. Her hand went instinctively to her belly. You kill people. When I have to. Killian met her eyes without flinching. To protect what's mine. To maintain order. To prevent worse violence. That's insane. But even as she said it, Elena thought about the men who'd tried to follow her home from the restaurant once, who'd cornered her in the parking garage until a manager intervened. Thought about her ex-boyfriend who'd disappeared the moment she'd told him about the pregnancy, leaving her with nothing. The world had never protected her. Maybe Killian's kind of protection was the only kind that actually worked. You don't have to like it, Killian said quietly. But you need to understand it. Because now that you're here, you're protected by it too. Over the following days, Elena learned the shape of her brother's empire. She saw the men who came and went with deferential nods and manila envelopes. She heard phone conversations conducted in code. She watched Killian review security footage with the cold efficiency of a general planning a campaign. But she also saw him reading pregnancy books late at night when he thought she was asleep. Saw him personally interview 3 different obstetricians to find the best one for her care. Saw the way his hands shook slightly whenever he looked at her, like he still couldn't quite believe she was real. One evening, she found him in his study staring at those old photographs of their parents, his tattooed fingers tracing the image of the little girl she'd been. Elena sat beside him without speaking, and after a long moment he said, I became this because I couldn't protect you then. I won't make that mistake again. What if I don't want to be protected by violence? She asked softly. Then I'll be violent, so you don't have to be. It should have terrified her. Instead, Elena felt something shift inside, an understanding that the monster sitting beside her had been born from the same fire that had stolen her childhood. He'd become this so neither of them would ever be powerless again. She took his hand, scarred and tattooed and capable of terrible things, and held it gently. Then teach me how to survive in your world, she said. Without losing myself in it. Killian looked at her with something like hope, and for the first time since the slap, Elena thought maybe they could both be saved. The package arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a courier service expensive enough to be legitimate. Maria brought it to Elena in the sunroom where she'd been reviewing the estate's household accounts. Killian insisted she understand every aspect of his holdings, even the mundane ones. The box was wrapped in silver paper with a cream ribbon, elegant and understated. There's a card, Maria said, her expression dubious as she set it on the table. Elena opened the small envelope, recognizing the handwriting immediately, Bianca's distinctive, slanted script. The message was brief. I was cruel. I'm sorry. Please accept this as an olive branch. B. Inside the box, nestled in white tissue paper, was a music box made of rosewood and mother of pearl. When Elena lifted the lid, a delicate melody began to play, a lullaby she didn't recognize. Tucked inside was a small card. For the baby, may she have the peace we've all lost. Elena's first instinct was to throw it away, but something about the craftsmanship stopped her. The music box was genuinely beautiful, hand-carved with intricate details. It seemed like a sincere gesture, the kind of peace offering a woman might send when she realized she'd gone too far. Should I tell Mr. Blackwood? Maria asked, eyeing the gift with suspicion.
No.
It's fine. Elena ran her fingers over the smooth wood. It's actually thoughtful. She placed the music box on her nightstand that evening, letting it play while she read before bed. The melody was soothing, and for the first time in weeks, Elena felt a small measure of peace. Maybe Bianca was capable of remorse. Maybe not everything had to end in violence and revenge. 3 miles away, in the Queen's penthouse, Bianca and Lorenzo Valli sat listening to crystal-clear audio transmitted through a microchip embedded in the music box's mechanism. Still don't understand why you care so much. Elena's voice came through the speaker, tired but warm. She must have been on the phone. He left me, Marcus. He wanted nothing to do with this baby the moment I told him. Why would I want him involved now? Bianca leaned forward, her smile predatory. There it was, confirmation that the pregnancy had nothing to do with Killian, that Elena's child belonged to some random man who'd abandoned her. Elena's voice continued. The father's name? Does it matter? He's not in the picture. He made that clear when he emptied my bank account and blocked my number. A bitter laugh. Some investment banker I met at a bar. 3 dates and I thought, God, I was so stupid. Lorenzo was already typing on his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. An investment banker. Anonymous father. Single mother playing the long game. He looked up, his eyes gleaming. This is perfect. We'll leak it to the tabloids. Waitress baby traps Killian with another man's child, uses fake birthmark story to secure inheritance. Medical experts will testify birthmarks aren't unique identifiers. We'll find 3 other people with similar marks. But the DNA test, Bianca said. If they actually run one. DNA tests take weeks to process. We leak this story now, create enough scandal that even if the test comes back proving they're related, the damage is done. Killian will look like a fool who fell for an obvious con. His associates will question his judgment. His enemies will circle. Lorenzo closed his laptop with a sharp click. And in the chaos, that girl will be vulnerable. Very vulnerable. Bianca rewound the recording, listening again to Elena's tired voice admitting that the baby's father was gone. She thought of that moment in the restaurant, Killian's face transforming when he saw the birthmark, the way he'd looked at Elena like she was something precious and irretrievable. The way he'd never once looked at Bianca with that kind of desperate, aching love. When do we release it? She asked. Tomorrow morning. Front page of every tabloid. Social media explosion by noon. By evening, Elena Rossi will be the most hated woman in America. Lorenzo poured them both scotch. And by the end of the week, she'll wish she'd never walked into that restaurant. They toasted to revenge, the music box lullaby still playing faintly through the speakers, a gentle, mocking soundtrack to the trap that was about to spring closed around an unsuspecting woman who'd only wanted to survive long enough to hold her daughter. In her bedroom at the estate, Elena closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, unaware that every word she spoke was being recorded, unaware that the olive branch was actually a noose, unaware that by accepting Bianca's gift, she'd invited the snake directly into the garden. The morning headlines hit like napalm, every tabloid, every gossip site, every morning show discussing the same story with breathless scandal. Mafia boss's sister or mistress. Pregnant waitress allegedly baby-trapping NYC's most dangerous man. The photos were everywhere. Killian placing the ring in Elena's hand, the 2 of them in his study late at night, taken with a telephoto lens through bulletproof glass, her moving into the estate with his protection. The narrative was surgical. Investment banker baby daddy, convenient birthmark, gold digger using pregnancy to trap a grieving man desperate for family. Medical experts testified that star-shaped birthmarks appeared in roughly 1 in 10,000 people. Former Blackwood Manor employees spoke anonymously about Elena asking questions about Killian weeks before the incident. By 9 a.m., the estate's phone lines were overwhelmed. By 10, protesters had gathered at the gates with signs calling Elena a whore and a con artist. By 11, Killian's attorneys were issuing cease and desist orders that would take days to process, while the damage continued to spread. Elena's prenatal appointment was scheduled for 2 p.m. at a private clinic in Manhattan, the same facility she'd been using for weeks. Killian wanted to accompany her, but an emergency meeting with his attorneys couldn't be postponed. He sent 3 security guards instead, armed, trained professionals who'd protected heads of state. It wasn't enough. Elena never made it inside the clinic. The security footage would later show a white van blocking the parking garage entrance for men in maintenance uniforms moving with military precision. 2 guards went down from tranquilizer darts before they could draw their weapons. The 3rd took a bullet to the thigh. Elena, 7 months pregnant and terrified, was grabbed from behind, a cloth pressed over her mouth until her struggles weakened and stopped. They left her medical files scattered across the concrete. They left her purse, her phone, everything that could be tracked. But they took her beige maternity dress apron, the one she'd kept wearing out of habit, even though she no longer needed it, and soaked it in the wounded guard's blood before dropping it near Killian's reserved parking space. The guard lived long enough to make the call. They took her. Boss, they took her. Killian arrived to find police cordoning off the scene, ambulances loading the injured guards, and that apron, Elena's apron, drenched in blood and abandoned like a declaration of war. His hands shook as he picked it up, the fabric stiff and dark, and something inside him that had been carefully controlled for 20 years finally shattered. "Everyone out," he said quietly. When the officers hesitated, he turned to face them, and whatever they saw in his eyes made them retreat. "I said everyone out. This is no longer a police matter." Within an hour, every asset Killian controlled was mobilized. His men flooded the streets, kicking down doors, pulling people from their beds, offering money and threatening violence in equal measure. He sat in the back of his SUV reviewing security footage on a laptop, his jaw clenched so tight it ached, watching his baby sister who he'd just found, being dragged unconscious into a van. "Find the van," he told Marcus, his second in command. "I want the registration, the route, the destination. I want names of everyone involved from the driver to whoever ordered this." "Boss, we got calls coming in. The Italians want to negotiate. The Russians are asking if you need assistance." "I don't want negotiations. I don't want assistance." Killian's voice dropped to something sub-zero. "I want the name of the family that touched her. And then I want their territory, their businesses, their homes. Everything they've built, I'm taking." His phone rang, a block number. Killian answered, putting it on speaker. Lorenzo Valli's voice was smooth, almost sympathetic. "I imagine you're upset. Understandable. But before you do something rash, you should know the girl is alive. Uncomfortable, perhaps, but alive." "Where is she?" Not a question. A demand backed by the promise of apocalyptic violence. "Safe.
For now.
But her condition is delicate. 7 months pregnant under considerable stress. It would be tragic if something happened to that baby because her supposed brother couldn't control his temper." Killian closed his eyes, fighting for control. "What do you want?" "Your territory in Brooklyn. Your shipping contracts. Your union influence. All of it, transferred within 72 hours, and the girl goes free. And if I refuse? Then you'll receive pieces of her, starting with fingers." A pause. "I understand pregnancy makes women's hands swell. The ring you gave her probably doesn't even fit anymore. Seems fitting that would be the first thing to go." The line went dead. Killian sat in silence for 10 seconds, then methodically destroyed everything within reach. The laptop, the phone, the windows separating him from the driver. His knuckles bled. His voice, when it finally emerged, was hoarse with rage. "Burn it. Burn everything the Vallis own. I want them to watch their empire turn to ash before I kill them." Elena woke to darkness and the smell of mildew, her head pounding from whatever they'd used to drug her. She was lying on a thin mattress in what felt like a basement, concrete walls, single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, metal door with no handle on the inside. Her hands weren't bound, which meant they were confident she couldn't escape. 7 months pregnant, alone, and locked in a room with no windows. They were right to be confident. The baby kicked frantically, responding to Elena's elevated heart rate. She pressed both hands to her belly, forcing herself to breathe slowly despite the panic clawing at her throat. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're okay. Killian will find us." But she couldn't just wait to be rescued. That was the thinking of someone who'd spent her life being powerless, and Elena was done being that person. She'd learned things working as a waitress, how to be invisible, how to listen to conversations people assumed weren't being heard, how to piece together information from fragments. The wealthy talked around their servers like they were furniture, revealing secrets they'd never share with people they considered equals. Elena had spent years perfecting the art of being underestimated. The guards changed shifts every 6 hours. She counted the footsteps, the voices. 4 different men rotated through, none of them professional enough to stay silent. By the second day, Elena had learned their names, their habits, and the fact that they played poker during the night shift and gossiped like housewives. "Don't know why Valley's so worked up about some waitress," one said, his voice carrying through the thin door. "Blackwood's gonna pay. He always pays for what's his." "It's about the land, idiot. It's always been about the land." This was the older guard, the one who seemed to be in charge. "You know the Blackwood estate in Connecticut? The commercial development up near the harbor? All of that used to be Valley property. So, people buy and sell property all the time. Not when it's taken by force. Not when Valley had to burn down an orphanage to make it look like an accident so the city would seize it and sell it cheap." Elena's blood went cold. She pressed her ear harder against the door, her heart hammering. "You're saying Lorenzo Valley burned down St. Catherine's? With kids inside?" 23 years ago, Blackwood's parents owned the land through some charity foundation. Valley wanted it for shipping access, but they wouldn't sell.
So he made it happen another way.
Set the fire, blamed faulty wiring, bought the land at auction 6 months later.
Jesus.
How many died? Official count was 20. Mostly kids. Couple staff members. A pause. Blackwood was just a kid himself then. 8 years old. He survived because he wasn't in the building that night. But his baby sister, she was supposed to be in the East Wing. That's what broke him. That's why he's been so ruthless building his empire. Revenge. Elena's hands were shaking. The fire that killed her parents. The fire that separated her from Killian. The fire that had stolen her childhood and her identity. Lorenzo Valley had set it. For land. For money. For territory that he'd turned into warehouses and shipping docks while children burned. And now his daughter had sent the music box. Had recorded her conversations. Had orchestrated this kidnapping not just for Killian's territory, but to tie up a 23-year-old loose end. Elena wasn't just leverage. She was evidence. A witness who could destroy the Valley family if the truth ever came out. "Valley's gonna kill her, isn't he?" the younger guard asked. "After Blackwood pays?" "Probably. Can't leave witnesses. Not when there's this much at stake." The sound of cards being shuffled. "Your deal." Elena slid down the wall to sit on the floor, her mind racing despite the fear. She had information now. Information that could destroy Lorenzo Valley. Information that explained everything. But she was locked in a basement, pregnant and alone, with guards who were already discussing her murder like it was inevitable. She needed to escape. Not just for herself, but for Killian, who'd spent 20 years building an empire on a foundation of lies someone else had constructed. Who deserved to know that his sister's death hadn't been an accident, that the man who'd just kidnapped her was the same man who destroyed their family. Elena looked around the room with new eyes, no longer seeing a prison, but a puzzle. The guards were careless. The door was old, and she'd spent years serving people who underestimated her. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Elena smiled despite everything. "Okay, little one," she whispered. "Let's show them what happens when you underestimate a waitress." Elena had been working on Tommy, the youngest guard, for 36 hours. He was 22, fresh out of community college, doing this job because his cousin promised easy money and he needed to pay off student loans. He had a girlfriend named Sarah who didn't know what he really did for work. He was scared of Lorenzo Valley, but more scared of disappointing his family. Most importantly, he felt guilty every time he brought Elena her meals and saw her pregnant belly. "My sister's about as far along as you," he'd said that morning, unable to meet her eyes. "She's having a boy. First grandkid in the family." "You must be excited," Elena had replied softly, placing one hand on her stomach. "Do you think your nephew would be proud of what you're doing right now?" The question had landed like a punch. Tommy had left without responding, but Elena saw the crack in his armor. She just needed to widen it. That evening, when he brought dinner, lukewarm takeout that she forced herself to eat for the baby, Elena tried again. "They're going to kill me. You know that, right? After they get what they want from Killian." "I don't know anything about that." But his hands shook as he set down the food. Lorenzo Valley set fire to St. Catherine's orphanage 23 years ago. 20 children died. I was supposed to be one of them. Elena held his gaze. Your nephew, when he's old enough to ask what you did for a living, what are you going to tell him? Stop. Tommy backed toward the door. That you helped murder a pregnant woman? That you worked for the man who burned children alive? Elena's voice cracked. I have a daughter coming in 2 months. She's never going to meet her mother because you need money for student loans? Tommy's face crumpled. I didn't sign up for this. Valley said it was just a pickup job, hold someone for a few days. Then help me. Please. Elena stood slowly, both hands on her belly. My brother has resources. Money. Witness protection if you need it. Just get me out of here. Before Tommy could respond, gunfire erupted upstairs, the distinctive crack of automatic weapons followed by shouting and breaking glass. The building shook with an explosion that sent dust raining from the ceiling. Blackwood, Tommy whispered, his face going white. He found us. More gunfire, closer now. Footsteps pounding overhead. Lorenzo Valley's voice screaming orders. Hold the basement. Don't let him. The words cut off in a burst of gunfire so loud Elena clapped her hands over her ears. Tommy fumbled with his keys, his decision made in the chaos. Come on, we need to move. The door at the top of the basement stairs exploded inward. 2 of Valley's guards came tumbling down, followed by Killian Blackwood in a bulletproof vest, blood on his face, a gun in each hand and murder in his eyes. He moved like violence personified, shooting the first guard before the man could raise his weapon, then pivoting to put 3 rounds center mass into the second. His eyes found Elena, and something in his expression broke. Tommy, don't. Elena started, but her guard had already raised his hands in surrender, his weapon clattering to the floor. I was helping her, Tommy said frantically. I swear I was getting her out. Killian's gun was already aimed at his head. Give me one reason not to kill you right now. Because he was helping me. Elena moved between them despite her pregnancy, making her movements slow and awkward. Killian, he was helping. For a moment, she thought her brother might shoot through her to get to Tommy. His finger was on the trigger, his hand steady despite the blood dripping from a cut above his eye. Then his gaze dropped to her belly, to the way she was protecting the guard with her own body, and the gun lowered slightly. Get her out, Killian said to Tommy, his voice deadly calm. There's an SUV outside. Marcus is waiting. If anything happens to her between here and that vehicle, I will hunt you for the rest of your short life. More gunfire upstairs. Killian turned toward the stairs, reloading with practiced efficiency. Where's Valley? 3rd floor office, Elena said. Killian, wait. I need to tell you something about the fire. Later. He gripped her shoulder briefly, the gesture carrying 20 years of loss and fear. Get safe. I'll finish this. Tommy guided Elena up the stairs through a war zone, bodies in the hallway, bullet holes in walls, the acrid smell of gunpowder and blood. Marcus was indeed waiting by the SUV, and as they drove away, Elena looked back to see the warehouse lit by muzzle flashes, her brother somewhere inside settling a debt that had been 20 years in the making. The baby kicked, and Elena pressed her hand to her belly. It's okay, she whispered. Uncle Killian's got us. Lorenzo Valley survived the warehouse shootout, though he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life from the bullet Killian put through his knee. Bianca, who'd been directing operations from a hotel suite in Midtown, was arrested at dawn by federal agents who'd been building a case for months and suddenly received an anonymous package containing 2 decades of incriminating evidence, financial records, recorded confessions, and security footage that placed Lorenzo at St. Catherine's the night of the fire. The evidence came from Killian's personal safe, meticulously gathered over 20 years of investigation. He'd always known who'd set the fire. He'd been waiting for the right moment to destroy them. Elena's kidnapping had provided that moment. The DNA test results arrived while Bianca and Lorenzo were being arraigned on charges of arson resulting in death, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and 17 other felonies that would ensure they'd die in prison. The test confirmed what Killian had known the moment he saw Elena's birthmark, 99.97% probability of siblingship. She was his sister, his family, the piece of his soul he'd thought died in flames 23 years ago. The tabloids that had crucified her now scrambled to print retractions. The medical experts who testified that birthmarks weren't unique identifiers suddenly discovered other urgent appointments. The anonymous employees who'd claimed Elena was a con artist disappeared back into anonymity, and the protesters at the estate gates were replaced by reporters demanding interviews that Elena refused to give. She didn't care about vindication. She cared about the baby girl who arrived 3 weeks early on a Tuesday morning, small but healthy, with her mother's dark hair and a cry that could wake the dead. Killian was in the delivery room, holding Elena's hand through every contraction, his tattooed knuckles white with the force of her grip. When the doctor placed Sophia Elena Rossi in her mother's arms, he wept, the kind of raw, uncontrolled crying that came from places too deep for words. His sister was alive. His niece was here. After 20 years of violence and loss, something pure and perfect had survived. "You want to hold her?" Elena asked, exhausted and radiant. Killian took Sophia with hands that had killed men, cradling her against his chest with impossible gentleness. "Hi, little one," he whispered. "I'm your Uncle Killian. I'm going to make sure you never have to be afraid." 3 months later, the Blackwood Empire no longer existed, not in the way it had for 2 decades. Killian had spent those months systematically dismantling everything he'd built, selling the illegal operations to competitors who'd sworn oaths of non-interference, transferring legitimate businesses into trusts that couldn't be traced back to him. The shipping contracts went to a workers' cooperative. The real estate holdings were donated to a foundation supporting single mothers. The offshore accounts were emptied and distributed to the families of people who'd been hurt by his organization over the years. He kept only the Westchester estate and enough money to live comfortably without working. The signet ring, the symbol of his absolute authority, he melted down and had her formed into a necklace for Elena with a small pendant for Sophia when she was old enough. "You're really doing this," Elena said one afternoon, watching him sign away his final territory. They were in the garden behind the estate, Sophia sleeping in a bassinet beside them, the October sun warm and golden. "Giving up everything." "I'm not giving up everything." Killian looked at his sister and his niece. "I'm choosing what matters." Elena reached over and took his hand, still scarred, still tattooed, but no longer stained with fresh violence. "What will you do now?" "I don't know." Killian smiled, and it was the expression of a man who'd been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what freedom felt like. "Maybe I'll learn to garden. Maybe I'll take cooking classes. Maybe I'll just sit here and watch Sophia grow up." He squeezed her hand. "What about you?" "I'm enrolling in business school." Elena had been researching programs, filling out applications during Sophia's naps. "I want to open a restaurant. A real one, where people are treated well and paid fairly. Where pregnant waitresses don't get slapped for bringing the wrong water." "I'll invest," Killian said immediately. "You'll be a silent partner," Elena countered. "I'm doing this myself." Stubborn. But he said it with pride. Sophia woke then, making the small mewling sounds that preceded full crying. Elena lifted her daughter, and Killian watched them with an expression of fierce protectiveness that would never completely fade. He would always be dangerous. He would always be capable of violence. But now that violence had a purpose beyond empire building, now it existed solely to protect the 2 people sitting beside him in the autumn sunshine, his sister, who'd survived fire and loss and betrayal to build something honest, and his niece, who would grow up knowing that family meant choosing each other every day, even when the choice was hard. Bianca Valli would spend the rest of her life in a federal prison, reviewing the choices that had led her there. Lorenzo would die behind bars 3 years later, his empire scattered, his name a cautionary tale about the price of greed. But Elena and Killian would build something different, not an empire, but a family. Not power, but peace. And on quiet mornings in the garden, Killian would hold Sophia, while Elena read business proposals, and he would remember the little girl with the star-shaped birthmark that he'd thought he'd lost forever. The girl who'd survived impossible odds to find her way back to him. The sister who'd shown him that the strongest foundation wasn't built on fear, but on the simple, radical act of choosing love over violence. The Blackwood name would fade from the criminal underworld. But in that garden, In that moment, with his family safe beside him, Killian was finally free. Thank you for watching. If you're enjoying this story, hit subscribe and don't miss the next one. It's even better